Money, relationships, gender. These are three things that are almost impossible to talk about without stepping on some kind of landmine of stereotypes and assumptions. But what if the core beliefs we have about how men and women handle their money and their feelings aren't just a little bit off? What if they're completely backward? Let's dive in. So, I want to start with a really direct question because it gets right to the heart of a myth so many of us live by. When it comes to making financial decisions, who do you think is more likely to be swayed by their emotions?
This stereotype is practically baked into our culture, right? We've all heard some version of it. Women are the emotional ones, prone to impulse buys and financial anxiety, while men are supposed to be these cool, logical calculators making rational decisions based purely on the numbers. But what does the actual science say?
Well, the science says the exact opposite. This quote is from Dr. Nicole Masters, who was the lead researcher on a really fascinating study that looked at this directly. And what they found, it flips that old stereotype completely on its head.
So let's actually look at the evidence. This first part is all about a finding that honestly should change how we think about emotions and money.
Okay, so what they did in this study was pretty clever. They had people watch real negative news stories, so genuinely emotional stuff. Right after, they were asked to make risky financial decisions with real money on the line. And the result? Men who watched the negative news became way more risk-averse. Their emotions from watching the news just carried over and directly messed with their financial choices. The women's decisions, though, they stayed stable, totally unaffected. So why the difference? Well, the researchers think it comes down to emotional intelligence. The theory is that because women, on average, tend to score higher on tests that measure emotional intelligence, they might be better at recognizing their feelings, managing them, and then separating them from a totally unrelated task, like investing. So it's not that women are less emotional, it might just be that they're better equipped to manage those emotions when it's time to make a decision. Okay, so if our most basic stereotypes about money are just wrong, what does that mean for our relationships? When a couple fights about money, what's really going on? Because as it turns out, it is almost never just about the dollars and cents. Researchers looked at thousands of online posts and survey answers and found these common themes kept popping up. And just look at the top one, perceived irresponsibility. This isn't about one person wanting a fancy coffee and the other wanting to save. No, this is about a fundamental breakdown of trust. It's about one person feeling like their partner's actions are putting their entire shared future in jeopardy. These fights are really about fairness, values, and respect. And where do these totally different values and emotional reactions even come from? Well, to get that, we have to go way, way back. The rule books we follow as adults were often handed to us before we even knew how to read. This quote from a TEDx talk just nails how this conditioning begins. The speaker, Emma, remembers hearing this on her very first day of school. The little girls who were crying got comforted. But the boys? They were told to get a grip, to be brave. A little boy doesn't cry. And this just lays out the two totally different emotional playbooks. For boys, the lesson is that emotions like sadness and fear are liabilities, the weaknesses you have to hide. Strength and ambition are the name of the game. For girls, it's the opposite. Anger is a huge no-no. Being sweet, sensitive, and tuned into what everyone else is feeling, that's how you get approval. The end result of all this is a kind of emotional imbalance that we carry straight into our adult relationships. Men can really struggle to express vulnerability, or sometimes even recognize what they're feeling, while women can struggle to express anger or set firm boundaries. This creates what sociologists call an intimacy deficit, and it becomes a massive source of conflict, especially when you throw money and marriage into the mix. And all of this builds and builds until it gets to the high-stakes world of marriage, the one place where all these different conditionings and perceptions have no choice but to collide with cold, hard reality. Research shows that men and women often walk down the aisle with fundamentally different ideas of what marriage even is. Men tend to see it as a destination, a stabilizing institution that kind of locks in the relationship. Women, on the other hand, are more likely to see it as a starting point, a dynamic, ongoing project that needs constant work and communication. And this gap in perception is made so much worse by a massive gap in knowledge. Just look at this number. A staggering 93% of married people have made no supplementary arrangements, like a marriage contract. And why not? Because most of us go into it with a vague, romantic, and often completely wrong idea of what marriage actually means legally. And then comes the collision.
When a marriage breaks down, all of these different emotional toolkits, these different views on the relationship, and this huge lack of legal knowledge all smash head on into the pretty unforgiving realities of the legal system.
And when that collision happens, here is a result that shapes so much of the modern conversation around marriage. This is from a Swiss study, but it reflects the pattern you see in a lot of Western countries. 96% of the people who pay maintenance contributions, or alimony, are men. That one data point creates an incredibly powerful perception that fuels a lot of fear.
And this is the raw emotion that data creates. This quote from a Reddit thread about marriage just perfectly captures a really widespread fear. It frames marriage not as a romantic partnership, but as a high-risk financial gamble where the potential losses feel absolutely catastrophic.
Yeah, and sociological research and just countless online discussions confirm this is not an isolated view. There is a widespread perception among many men that if a divorce happens, they're systemically set up to lose, both financially and with custody of their kids. Now, whether this perception is statistically accurate in every single case isn't really the point. The belief is powerful, and it creates what one study calls a culture of suspicion that hangs over relationships, sometimes from the very start.
So, if the old stereotypes are scientifically wrong and the traditional models seem to be fueling all this fear and conflict, where does that leave us? What's supposed to come next?
When you put it all together, the problem becomes crystal clear. We are all trying to build 21st century partnerships, but we're using 20th century stereotypes as our guide, all while being governed by legal systems that most of us just don't get. I mean, it's a recipe for disaster.
So let's just quickly recap. We've seen that the stereotype about women being more emotional with money is probably wrong. The evidence might even point the other way. We've traced how our childhood emotional training shapes our adult conflicts. And we've seen how a deep misunderstanding of what marriage even is legally can lead to a whole lot of fear and resentment.
And all of this really leads to one final critical question. We can see the old scripts are failing us. The old rules clearly don't fit our modern lives. So the real challenge for all of us is to figure out what new rules we need to write for ourselves. Rules based not on dusty old stereotypes, but on real emotional honesty and clear-eyed communication.